For too long, folks in Philadelphia bemoaned the fact that we weren't like fill in the blank. Fill in the blank, whether it was Silicon Valley or Massachusetts or whatever. And I think it's really healthy that the young companies now are saying, we don't want to be like anybody else. We are who we are, and we're going to grow our company base and our own culture here.
Philadelphia has become really friendly to, I think, the DIY bootstrap mentality, and in some ways known for it.
Philadelphia doesn't have the venture capital industry that a lot of other regions have. So I think there's a much larger focus here on bootstrapping your company. And that kind of ties into the lean methodologies as well. You know, doing as much testing as you possibly can, you know, making sure you have a business there, and then focus on scaling and raising money later.
In the case of RJ Metrics, the fact that we're in Philly is directly related to our pre-existing internal philosophy about wanting to bootstrap a company and wanting to be economically efficient, because we love this city, we know it really well. We also know that cost of living here and kind of the average wage here is something that's lower than in Silicon Valley or in New York City. And as a function of that, we were able to bootstrap a company more easily and scale up to a greater headcount and grow something that was a more profitable business in its early days.
If you look at why people want to start businesses, they want independence and they want financial success. There is a lot to say for that outcome, because as soon as you start taking on outside money, you get diluted and you give up control rights of various types. And what that effectively means is you need a bigger and bigger exit to get the same amount of money back. And so a lot of times, a good bet is to bootstrap for a while until you're in a scenario where you can actually make more calculated probabilities that this is the right time to take the money.
Gabriel Weinberg actually, he said something actually when he's here at Dream It the other day. He talked about the fact in San Francisco sometimes money comes so easy that bad ideas get money. And here I think that companies do have to prove things out a little further, but I think that makes them stronger by the time they actually do raise money.
I would say a common thread of the Philly companies that I've seen is that they're a little less hype, a little more substance.
If there's one major difference between Philly startups and other startups, it's perhaps that Philly startups are more grounded in reality.
I've heard it expressed as Philly companies build stuff that actually works.
Maybe we're not talking about startups in the way that like startup tabloids want us to think about them in terms of high risk, high growth, like that's fine. But what about just building something really useful that has value to a customer and charging them money for it? And I've seen a lot more of that get people places than I have seen, the sort of casino version of startups. I don't think Philadelphia is necessarily tailored towards the casino version of startups.
And I think that raising money at a very early stage is something that's very, very, very encouraged in New York and expected out of companies that are growing. Whereas I think part of what has been great about being in Philly is that we've really been embraced for our bootstrapping mentality.
New York's great, but you wouldn't want to be young and poor there. You wouldn't want to start a business there if you don't have an immediate path to a huge capital infusion. Impossible. You'll starve.
Houses are cheap, beer's cheap, food's cheap, food's great. It's an easy town to make a living in. If you make a decent salary in Philadelphia, you will live well. That can't be said for San Francisco, where I used to live out in the suburbs here. And I showed people from San Francisco pictures of my house, and like, how can you afford a mansion? I'm like, a mansion? It's just like a 4-bedroom suburban colonial. And they're like, no, that's huge.
You can get a house in Philadelphia for what you would pay for a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn.
Philadelphia is a place for people that want to start a company, but not give up their quality of life in order to do it, which I more people that burn themselves out starting companies both burn themselves out and end up with an unsuccessful company. Statistically, most of those companies burn out their founders and still fail. If you burn out and you succeed, you're in the vast minority. So if you're gonna bootstrap and maintain quality of life and have a successful company, this seems like a great place to do it.
It's cheaper to start the company, it's cheaper to get labor, and therefore, your runway can be much longer. And generally what kills startups, by tautology, what kills startups is they stop running. And so the longer runway they have, the more likely they are to succeed.
Generally, the cost of salaries and things are lower than they are in the Valley by 10 to 30%. But even more important in my mind is the turnover. Very low here. The loyalty. Once someone's working at a company, it's pretty low turnover. The 4 or 5 years that I was running Boomi, we had next to no turnover, unwanted turnover. That's hugely expensive. We were partnering with companies in the Valley where the entire management team would turn over once every 3-4 months. Really, really hard to build relationships, but on their side, very costly to have that churn. And the fact that we don't have nearly that sort of churn is a huge competitive advantage for companies building here in Philadelphia.
We hear the same problem day in, day out. An investor comes to me saying, find me qualified deal flow. And on the other hand, an entrepreneur comes to me saying, I can't find any money. Find me an investor who will help me get my business off the ground. So there's a clear problem. We have money. We have great startups. We just don't communicate well.
If you talk to the entrepreneurs, they say that there's not enough investors. If you talk to the investors, they say there's not enough good entrepreneurs or good companies to invest in.
What a venture capitalist and increasingly what an angel investor wants is they want to get a return of 5 to 7x on their investment within 3 to 5 years, okay? So it's not every startup company, it's not every tech company that's going to have a market large enough and going to be able to scale up large enough and fast enough to be an appropriate profile for investment.
There's definitely a perception in the startup community that access to capital is easier in other cities, so as you need to raise venture money, that New York or San Francisco are the places to go. I personally don't believe that. And I think anyone who's seasoned at some level of having built a startup and raised capital, would feel the same way. The reality is the money follows the execution. If you're successfully building your enterprise and wherever it is, money's going to find you and want to invest in you. Just the fact that you're in New York or San Francisco doesn't mean that people will now open up their checkbooks to you. What makes it harder are some of it is the old story of the tax structure in the city for businesses. It's a real issue. It's not a mystery why so many companies in this region are right over the city line, whether it's in Ballackinwood or they're in Conshohocken or wherever they are. They're deliberately avoiding being in Center City because of the tax regime that's here.
When you start to look at some of the taxes that we incur as a company, some of them start to become the equivalent of a couple of hires in a year. And you say, these 2 people I just hired, I could have almost hired for free if I was located in Austin, where I don't have a certain tax.
It's not the money. I'm happy to pay taxes. I believe in common good, like sharing the costs of things that we do collectively together. But I don't want to deal with all the paperwork or all the stuff that makes it hard to start a business for one person or 2 people. That was hard. That's the hard stuff. And
I would say the business creation here in Philadelphia could be a lot easier. There's just a lot of confusing paperwork. You get letters from different government organizations that are a surprise. You don't understand what they are. It's not really clear what you're supposed to do. So you have to depend more on your peers or service providers to help walk you through the process.
It's stupid. I know I'm burning money by not relocating to Conshohocken or somewhere else, but I love the city. And I want to see good things happen to this city. I also love the impact that we can have on the community though. So we can have nonprofit events here. We have some nonprofit yoga organization coming here to do something with the community. We can do that here in our space. So we can try to help uplift the community from right here within our office walls, right?
People who choose to work here, I think, do so because they want to do more. In other words, in a lot of environments, specifically within the technology discipline, I feel like you have to really be, again, it's this sense of competition and really be like fighting to catch up with something. And because in Philly there is much more of an open exchange and sort of a flat structure, if you will, I feel like people are able to do things to expand their business to be maybe some pro bono work they care about, or like Punk App developing a product, or like WebLink running a bar, right? Like it's not just about like doing the one tech thing and trying to be better than everyone else. It's like, oh, we're creating a business here, but we also are creating this other value around that business.
It's a smaller community where people tend to know each other. People tend, because they know each other, they tend to work together to help companies get along.
There's just not a sense of a competitive nature or somebody being happy when someone else fails. I think that there's a very genuine sense of friendship and camaraderie. And
given the fact that we have a Quaker background, the culture is much more towards collaboration.
I think that's important because there's a we can attitude instead of an I can attitude.
It's part DIY, but it's also this openness to share knowledge. Like, I'm not scared to tell you what I'm working on because I don't think you're going to steal my ideas. I think if anything, you're going to give me a new idea by opening myself up and sharing what I'm thinking about, what I'm working on. I think we just get it that works better than like sniping and fighting, and it's just not really a part of what happens here.
That's what Philly Tech is all about. It's the passion and the drive to just get it done. We don't need venture capital to make things happen. The passion we have is our venture capital.